You didn't. Okay. Hello. Welcome, everybody. We're going to get started here. Just as a reminder, Idea Grove did sponsor this room. They are a PR agency in Dallas. If you can, give them a little shout out on social medias. I'm not a good presenter, so I'm just straight up with you. And it's morning. I hate mornings. We have Julie here, but I did come prepared. Y'all better get ready. She's talking about analytics, which for me is like the most boring thing in the world. But Julie loves it. She's extremely freaking good at it. So give her a big round of applause as she gets started.
Never saw in GA3, or they were so hard to access in GA3 that it really wasn't worthwhile to pull out these insights to begin with. So today I'm going to cover a number of things. I'm going to cover the GA4 data model. I'm also going to go into audiences, segments, talk about how people are navigating through your website with path explorations and funnels. And then we'll finish it off with acquisition and then measuring engagement, which I think engagement is probably the best part of GA4, even though there are a lot of good parts. But to start off with, in case y'all haven't heard, there is a new version of Google Analytics. And honestly, it feels a little bit like this sometimes, where GA4 is not fully developed, but Google's pushing you down that road. And you're sitting here like, we've got a perfectly good GA3 product. Why can't we just go down that road? And then it also feels a little bit like this, where GA4 gave you this burning house and then says, haha, go deal with it now. But hopefully by the end of this presentation, you won't feel like this. You'll feel equipped to answer the questions about the customer journey because you have watched this presentation. So to start off with, the data model for Google Analytics has changed, okay? This is going to be your money phrase whenever you're talking to clients, stakeholders, why can't I get this when I got it in GA3? Well, the data model has changed. Or, why is this a little bit different in GA4? Well, the data model has changed. So let's dive into this and what exactly this statement means. Now with GA3, what you had was you had somebody who would visit your website, and all of their website visits were grouped into a session. So you would have page views, maybe you would have some e-commerce actions, but again, all capsulated into the idea of a session. Now, say somebody comes back to your website. Again, whether they have page views or maybe you inputted some custom events with your category, your action, your label, this was still all viewed under the lens of a single session. So this translated to a couple of things in real life. To start off with a very, very few exceptions, all of your reports are going to be session-based, okay? So this is GA3. And if you think about all your GA3 reporting that you've done up to this point, like, it's starting to click. Like acquisition, session-based. Conversion rate, session-based. Landing page reports, session-based. Everything was session-based. Another thing that led to was you couldn't view the customer journey as it pertained to events and page views across multiple sessions for more than one single user at a time. Now, I don't know about y'all, but I have more than one person visiting my website. So this was really unhelpful because I couldn't aggregate the data, which means that I couldn't make it actionable. And then the last thing, this is more of a pet peeve of mine than anything else, but you couldn't mix hit types. And the way that translated for me in real life was I was spending time talking to stakeholders, we can't exactly get that metric because then you'd have to mix these hit types or explain to somebody why their customer report wasn't exactly accurate. So just an annoyance, but nevertheless, it was an implication of GA3's data model. Now with GA4, we have a little bit different of a data model. We still have sessions, those aren't going away, but it's a session event. So if somebody visits your website, they have the session event, they have page view events, they have your e-commerce events, your custom events. All of those, though, are not grouped under a single session. They're all individual events. And then with each event, you have parameters attached to it. A great example of this is your page view event. So a parameter could be your page title or your page URL. They're all attributes that are assigned to that one event. Now, I had heard this over the past 2 years as I had become familiarizing myself with GA4, but it didn't really set in as to why it was a big deal that the data model had changed until I started digging into my reports. So to save y'all 2 years of misunderstandings like I had, I'm going to make it very, very flat-footed. In GA3, whenever you view reports, they are automatically grouped by sessions unless you specifically specify it. And with GA4, it's the exact opposite. Nothing at all in your reporting is going to be grouped by sessions unless you specify it. I'm going to go on this point about GA4 about 3 or 4 times to really drive it home. But whenever you pull up your reporting in GA4, remember, not session-based. You're looking at multiple sessions. You're looking at the whole entire customer journey. Okay, so event-based data model. Let's talk about these events a little bit. So to start off with, you've got some automatically collected events. And you already had this in GA3. You had automatically collected page views, maybe your site search event if you configured your Google Analytics properly. And in GA4, you have something similar, automatically collected page views and then site search. But with GA4, you're actually able to collect other events by default as well, such as outbound links, file downloads, and video engagement. And then there is one more event that I'm not necessarily a fan of, but I'll put it out there, scroll tracking. So with scroll tracking, it's a little bit frustrating because you'll have a scroll tracking event fire 90% of the way down the page, not 80, not 100, not 50, not 20, only 90. So it's up to you whether you want to turn on this automatic tracking solution. I myself went for a more custom solution, and that way I could get a little bit more insight, but automatically collected 90% if you want it. Now, you still need custom events. Remember that your data and your insights are only going to be as complex as the tracking that you implement. So I would recommend a number of custom events, and actually Google has a number of recommended events as well. So let's say you're e-commerce. Google has the promotion events, they have your purchase events, add to cart events. And then for those of you who aren't e-commerce, Google once again has a number of events that they recommend you tracking. Now, putting on a little bit of my tinfoil hat here, if you have the option to use Google's nomenclature, do so. What we've heard is that Google Analytics, like the cartoon earlier implied, it's not fully done. And so what you don't want to do is you don't want to set up your events now, not go with Google's naming conventions, and then all of a sudden Google says, hey, surprise, we've released this new functionality, and now you have to reconfigure all your events. And there's a link at the end that'll show you where Google recommends all these events. And then you can even go further outside of the box. What if you want to track CTA clicks and you want to separate that out from the other events that you're tracking? Or what if you want to track errors on the website, like 404 errors, JavaScript errors, especially for those of y'all who have React websites? Or maybe you're just looking to use Google Analytics to understand the user experience a little bit better. And you could do something like website interactions where you could track pop-ups, you could track carousels, things like that, but it would put it in its own separate category. And Google Analytics allows 500 custom events, and that's just with the free version. I'm currently using the enterprise version, so I have a lot bigger limits. And even with all of my limits, I'm still only using about 35 custom events. So don't feel like you have to track everything super uniquely, but also don't feel like you are stuck inside this little box. And then the link that y'all will get, there's a list of recommended GA4 events, and I would just recommend y'all use that. Okay, so let's dive into the customer journey a little bit. We talked about events. This is the basis of GA4. And in order to really demonstrate this, I'm going to use an example website. So I Googled online, there is a fake realtor named Georgina Smith. And we're going to be using her website, and we're going to say that I am a marketing manager for her. She has a page for properties, and if you click on one of these beautiful properties, you'll see that she has a number of accordions right here. Now, with those accordions, these aren't going to fire page views, okay? And so if I want to track how people are interacting with my website, I'm going to have to do a little bit of that custom event. If I scroll further down the page, I also have these CTAs. Now, with these CTAs, I know that they're going to lead to a page view, but I might say, well, I'm really wondering what CTA clicks are informing the customer journey. So once again, I'm going to have to use some custom event tracking. So now that we've got our example, let's talk about segments. Let's actually apply this. So as a marketer, I'm sure you want to know the exact secret sauce that makes your customers convert, right? It's not just, do they click one button? You're probably looking at it and you're saying, well, what if they click this button and then view this page and then click this other button 3 times? Does that automatically lead to a conversion every time, right? So with GA3, you were able to view segments to kind of compare somebody clicking that locations accordion within the properties page or somebody clicking on the interior details or the schools. GA3 made a wonderful little graph here, okay? You have goal completions, you have conversion rate, but then what happens if you want to go for that secret sauce mix? What if you want to know, are people more likely to convert if they're clicking on schools and interior details? Or are they more likely to click if they only click schools? And so what you would have to do in GA3 is you would have to create different segments for each and every one of these possibilities. So this is one of those insights where you could have it in GA3. It's possible, but y'all are busy people. Y'all aren't going to be spending your time trying to figure out the secret sauce by creating 10 different custom events. Now GA4 comes in and they have this thing called segment overlap. I am a huge fan because all I had to do was build my 3 segments here, location information, schools, and interior details. And Google said, aha, well, what about finding the magic combination here? And so I could change and I could see the number of active users for these combinations. I could see the number of conversions. And I want y'all to keep active users in the back of your mind because we're going to talk about that at the very end. But it helps me determine that secret sauce and it helps me do it efficiently.
I have a question on that.
Yeah.
So you're saying instead of creating every permutation of that,
exactly.
do it once, you can still create that one time.
Yes. Yes. So this is a great tool for if you've got some really creative stakeholders and they've got any certain hypothesis about what's going to lead to a conversion, use this report and prove them right or prove them wrong. Now, I mentioned that GA4 by default is not session-based. So whenever you're building out your segment, again, you have to think about, do you want this across all sessions or do you want this within the same session? Now, maybe you're saying, well, Julie, this is wonderful. I don't have accordions on my website. Okay, not a problem. Let's think of some other different ways that we can use this segment overlap. And maybe you want to see who's used the mortgage calculator on your website and then ultimately change their budget. Maybe you wanted to see what kind of traffic you're getting from Google Business Places. Are you getting more buyers or are you getting more sellers? Or maybe you want to see if testimonials actually influence a call. All of this can be done with segment overlaps. And then Google took segments and took it to the next level. So they used their AI, their machine learning, and they actually have predictive metrics. Now, I talked with our Google Analytics rep because we are an enterprise client. And I said, well, are you going to release this to the general public who doesn't use e-commerce? And they said, well, no, we're only going to use this for e-commerce. So if you are feeling super fancy, what I would recommend doing is if you have a certain number of conversions, if you've reached the threshold defined by Google, change your website into an e-commerce sort of tracking website. So say you have appointment schedules. Why not make that e-commerce? And that will give us your idea of what's the likelihood that somebody's going to purchase in the next 7 days. This is going to give you a little bit of an edge because you're going to be running a Facebook campaign and Google's AI is already telling you, well, I don't know if this is going to actually draw conversions. And so while you certainly want to wait for your Facebook data to fully process, at the same time, you can kind of be planning a week ahead and be like, well, I may have to shift in a couple of weeks. So it gives you a heads up.
What is that threshold?
I think it is 1,000 events. I'd have to look into it per month. So I'd have to look into it. I have a rather large website, so thresholds often don't apply to me. Now, audiences. These are very similar to segments. So whereas segments are retroactive, okay, this is where you can talk to your stakeholders, you're in a meeting, and they're like, well, what if? You're going to want to pull up segments to help kind of analyze that. But you can't apply segments to your Google Ads campaigns. So there's where you're going to have to want to bring in audiences instead. But this is super simple. I shared the segment screen with y'all before, but what I didn't highlight was this red square over here that says build an audience. That's all you have to do. That's all you have to check. Now, audiences are not going to be retroactive. And so if you build your audience and then you immediately get a notification, 0 people are in this audience. Well, no duh. It's like 5 seconds old. So don't worry, you didn't do anything wrong. Come back and check it. If your segment was set up correctly and you're seeing data in that, that's your good indication that your audience is also going to be set up properly. So we talked a little bit about segments, audiences, the people that visit your website. Now let's talk about how they're exploring your website and how they're going through. GA3 had this thing called the behavior flow report. I hated this report, mainly because, I mean, you could only export to PDF. Like, what good does that do me? So when the path exploration report came around, and Google also only offered the option to export to PDF, I was like, oh, well, what's this going to provide me? Well, actually, it does provide a little bit more flexibility. So I want to go over 4 key things that are different from this behavior flow report to the path exploration report that you see in GA4. So to start off with the behavior flow report, you could only see 6 events or 6 combination of page views and events. And after that, you could see how people were flowing from the second interaction to the third interaction to fourth interaction, but the rest of them, it was kind of lost. And sure, you could right click, view group details, and then it would tell you the drop off, but I don't really necessarily want to know the drop off. Like, I want to know how people are continuing through the user journey. And Google Analytics 3 didn't provide this. But with GA4, what they allow you to do is they allow you to expand this out to 20 rows. And even though it is very faint, you can see the paths and they go through and then even further. So you're not restricted anymore. You have that flexibility to explore the customer journey. Now, when you're exploring it, one of the other awesome things is that GA4 actually allows you to edit what events you collect or what events show up in this path exploration report. So in GA3, you're not seeing any of the edit buttons, but in GA4, Google says, well, what events are meaningful to you? So for example, if I'm tracking this scroll tracking event and I'm saying, well, that's really interesting information to have, but that's not really going to influence my view of the customer journey. Perfect. Take it out. And that way you have a more concise view of how people are interacting with events throughout your website. This is also a great tool to think about whenever you're setting up your custom events, because these are going to be the individual ways that you can analyze the paths. Now, the third difference between GA3 and GA4 is that GA3 only went one way. But with GA4, you actually have the opportunity to explore paths in 2 different directions. So a great example of this is, what if I want to know how people are progressing through the website whenever they start a session? That's option 1. Whereas with option 2, you can say, well, how did people end up doing a CTA click? Or how did people end up filling out a form on my website? And with GA3, this is really limited And if you did get this information, it was because of page views, and you could only see the first 3 paths before somebody converted. Whereas this will provide you with the 10 steps before a certain ending point. And then the last thing, I don't know if y'all have heard me say this, but GA4 is not restricted by sessions. So whenever you look at the path exploration, you'll notice that I have a number of session start events. And that's where you can tell where somebody is leaving the website, coming back, leaving, coming back again. So you get a true picture of the customer journey. So I really love the path exploration report, but sometimes you're not in like a Friday creative mood where you want to see the 8 different ways that people are navigating through your website. Sometimes you're just like, Julie, I got an 8-step form. I need to know how people are dropping off. And that's where funnels come in. So funnels were possible in GA3, but it was really, really difficult. You were often found shoving whatever process you had into an e-commerce event, and then your process was a set number of steps. So for example, on my website, I have a scheduling process, and sometimes it's 7 steps, sometimes it's 5 steps, sometimes it's 2 steps. Fitting this into GA3 was extremely difficult, and I had to fire a lot of fake events to make sure that the flow looked exactly the same, regardless of what view I was looking at. The other option that I had was to take everything into my reporting platform, so like Data Studio, now Looker Studio, and try and configure everything through there. But really, that's trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. Like, it's just not, it's not going to work. The other thing that made this e-commerce functionality and this funnel functionality in GA3 really not my favorite was the fact that your drill down dimensions in red, you were a little limited there. So with these, you have a certain number of dimensions that you can drill down, but I personally love dealing with technological friction points, okay? How are my iPhone users different than my Android users? You know, how is iOS 15 different than 16? And you couldn't tell that with GA3. You were stuck with device category, and too bad, so sad, that's it. With GA4, however, you get a lot more options to look into the technology and how people are going through the funnel differently with different pieces of technology. But you can also go in and you can look at breakdown by, say, month, or even if y'all are doing some A/B testing, like pull in your A/B testing experiment. And this is really easy to do. Google has a breakdown box, and you just pull your dimension of choice into that breakdown box. Voila, you can see the drop off or the completion rate by each step and broken down by each of your dimensions. Now, this is month, and I chose this because it was easy to view, easy to digest, but there's actually a way cooler way to see over time drop-offs. I'll show you at the end of this section. So the next thing that's really helpful is that Google Analytics shows the elapsed time in GA4. Now, I mentioned that Google Analytics 4 is not restricted by sessions. So if you turn on this button, you may have something like, it took somebody almost 5 hours to go from step 1 to step 2. Whoa. Well, you know, Google Analytics is going to take into consideration all of somebody's sessions. So it's possible for somebody to visit your website, go away, and then come back. And then that will be accounted for in your different steps. Now, this is where it's going to be incredibly important to test your funnel logic with your stakeholders, okay? GA4 is a cool new tool. Put your ego to the side, though, because it's going to be your stakeholders that are going to spot your logic flaws better than anybody else. And that was actually the case for me a couple of weeks ago whenever I was looking at this. But what you can do is, if you are working with your stakeholders, ask them questions about how people are experiencing your product. So you can't restrict things by sessions, but you can time box it. So you can say, okay, if somebody visited step 1, within 5 minutes or within 10 minutes, within an hour, did somebody visit step 2? Was it directly? Was it indirectly? And actually your path explorations that you used before, that can help inform you. So maybe you've got a form and you know that somebody isn't going to fill out the form until they view the product details. So maybe you say, okay, well, we're going to add step 1 and step 2, but they're going to have an indirect step in between them. Okay, so then the last thing is your trended funnel. So with your trended funnel, this is going to be the better way to view months or time and drop off. With the trended funnel, we're still dealing with funnel exploration. Our technique has not changed, but our visualization has changed. And this is going to be especially important for those of you who have in-house web developers. So if the web developers release a change, all of a sudden your forms drop off. You're like, well, what happened? You have an exact date that you can go to. And you can actually scroll down and do by dimension if you want to. So, hey, did you do a release on September 23rd for iOS 14? Oh, why, yes, we did. Wonderful. That's causing our form fill rate to drop off exponentially. And it gives you a little bit of an edge as far as like solving these problems. Okay, so we talked about how people are going through the website, some of their characteristics. Let's talk about how we got them to begin with. This is going to be one of those GA3 metrics that was possible to get, but maybe just a little bit more time consuming. So none of us ever did it. Now with acquisition in GA3, because GA3 is based on sessions, you had acquisition that was session based. And with GA4, you actually have two different types. So you have first user acquisition and you have your session source acquisition. So this is really useful when you're talking to your partners about maybe you're running some display advertisings and they're talking about how much traffic they're driving to your website. Well, pull up the first user source and medium. Yeah, you're driving traffic to my website. Display is an awareness medium, but you weren't the one generating the awareness. It was somebody else. And so this helps you view or helps you walk through conversations like that. And while you were able to get this information in GA3 via new users, things of that nature, it wasn't as easy to compare A to B. So I really like this feature. I'm glad Google released it. It helps us view attribution a little bit better. And then lastly, let's talk about engagement, okay? Google Analytics took a major step up here. And in order to talk about engagement, I first have to set the stage with how time is collected in GA3. Anybody who worked with me for more than 2 weeks knew that this was a pet peeve of mine. Do not include it on the reports. I hated that Google even showed it in their interface. And that's because of the way that they collected time. So with Google Analytics, time was collected via page views. So if you were measuring average session duration, you could say somebody visited the homepage at 3:10 p.m. Then, because we're dealing with Georgina Smith's website, they visited the property page at 3:13. So Google said, aha, based on the page views and the timestamp sent with that, you spent 3 minutes on the website. And then you visited a specific property page, voila, 7 minutes on the website. And then you decided to exit the website. Well, we don't really know what time you spent on the individual property page because time is based on page views. You didn't have an additional page view. And Google said, don't worry about it, like just the details. Average time on site is 10 minutes. And I think a lot of people, because Google backed it, you were lured into this false sense of security of, well, yeah, it's good enough. But I want to show y'all like why this is such a wrong way of measuring time. And I'm going to do so by talking to y'all about applying Google's time on site logic to measuring how long it takes to drive somewhere based on stoplights. So I am currently living in Spring, Texas. It's a little suburb of Houston. For those of you who aren't familiar with Texas geography, it took me about 3.5 hours to get here to Dallas today. I've been able to do it in under 3, but don't tell my mother, like that sort of thing. Now, the DFW airport also should take me 3.5, maybe 4 hours. But it's certainly a drive. So we're going to use this example of how long it takes me to get from Spring to the DFW airport using stoplights. Now at 3:10, I leave my house. At 3:13, I've got a light near my house called Holsworth Road. I hit it at 3:13. So based on that logic, I've been on the road for about 3 minutes. At 3:15, I hit a light at Grand Parkway. And so we know I've been on the road for another 2 minutes. Then I go from Grand Parkway to I-45 to I-35 to Highway 114, and I land at the airport. No stoplights. It's wonderful. And based on Google's logic, no stoplights. We don't know how much time you're spending there. So we're going to say that the time it took you to get to the DFW airport from Spring is 5 minutes. Okay. Now, do y'all get to the airport 2 hours early? Because I do. Married to a pilot, But if you used Google's calculation to decide when to get to the airport, like, you'd missed your flight, when really it took you probably 3.5 hours. So when GA4 rolled out, they said, hey, we're doing timestamps, but we're not just going to do it based on page views. We're going to do it based on all your different events. And so here I brought in seconds. So at 3:10 and 10 seconds, you visited the home page. Then Google sent what they call a user engagement event. I'll dive into this in a second. So Google knows that you spent 10 seconds on the website. Then I decided to click to call on mobile. I'm very savvy, and so I know that I needed to implement that as a custom event on my website. And with that custom event, Google said, wonderful, we're sending a timestamp. So I've now spent an additional 2 minutes and 10 seconds on the website. Then I open a new tab to research other agents because I'm not so sure about Georgina Smith. She's nice, but So then I decide about 3 minutes later to come back to the Georgina Smith homepage. I was on Google. I was away from the website. I decided to come back. Then I visit the properties page at 3:17 and 20 seconds, meaning I spent another 30 seconds on the homepage. From there, I look at interior details. I submit an interest form, and then I finally exit the website. So my total time on site is going to be about 8 minutes and 20 seconds. This isn't going to be available in Google's interface, but it is available via BigQuery. So still accessible. What Google's going to instead say is your session engagement time. So the time that somebody was actively using your website was 5 minutes. Now, let's talk about this user engagement event a little bit, because this is one of the core components that shows how Google is shifting how they look at users from GA3 to GA4. So with GA3 or with GA4, it's no longer about time on site. It's now about engagement. And we kind of got the idea that Google was shifting towards more of an engagement focus whenever they decided to not include bounce rate at all in GA4. Then, of course, mass hysteria ensued, and Google said, no, wait, we'll bring it back. But bounce rate now is measured a little bit differently. So let's go back in time a little bit. Let's go back to GA3 and compare that to GA4. So with GA4, engagement is specifically defined as somebody who has visited 2 or more pages on your website, has had a conversion, or has hit a time threshold of your choosing. Okay, it can be 10 to 60 seconds. Bounce rate, on the other hand, was someone who did not have a second interaction with your website. So a second page view, maybe a second event. Here's how that translates into real life. Bounce rate was oftentimes inflated by people who only pursued a good bounce rate, like instead of pursuing conversions. So engagement rate is going to be a little bit harder to trick. Your bounce rate is going to go up a little bit depending on how you've had your events configured, because this new engagement rate, which bounce rate is based off of, is now a little bit more dummy proof. So let's go back to this user engagement event for a second. So with the user engagement event, I mentioned that you can choose between 10 and 60 seconds as how somebody is engaging with your website. It's up to you. I personally choose 10 seconds because I know that's the time that it takes somebody to view a page and then place a phone call, but to each his own. Then let's look at the time that it took me to open up a new tab on Google and research agents, and then come back to the Georgina Smith homepage. So this is not actually a special event that I sent. As much as I do custom events, This is actually something Google tracks by default. Google is able to tell whenever the website, your website, is in the foreground. So if you navigate to another tab, if you refresh the page, if you exit, Google's going to be able to record all that. So this makes not only your engagement time much more valuable and much more accurate, but also whenever you're looking at like the funnels that we were looking at before with the engagement time, that's going to be more accurate as well. Another important note is that this session engagement time is going to be nowhere near your average session duration. So don't compare the two metrics, like that's a losing battle. Session duration wasn't an accurate metric before, and engagement time is always going to be less than the total time because, you know, the chances of 100% of your website users engaging 100% of the time is like very, very low. So in conclusion, GA4 isn't bad, but it's definitely different, okay? So different can be scary. I was scared. I was not a fan of GA4 for a while, but the more I got into it and the more I got comfortable with it, you know, it really is a better solution for us whenever we want to understand the customer journey. I want y'all to lean into the event-based data model, okay? This is, don't hold on to your GA3 data, like lean on into it and leverage all the different topics that we've talked about today to better understand the customer journey. And I also want to give a special shout out to all the people that I learned from. So analytics knowledge is meant to be shared. And I hope that y'all take some of the stuff that y'all have learned today, share it with your friends if they care about learning about Google Analytics. Share it also with your colleagues, your clients, like spread the love. And these are some great resources. Charles Farina is on, let's see here. I think he's on Data Driven You. He's a really good one to follow. And then I also put two of my former and current coworkers on here because they're the ones that also have challenged me about my GA4 learnings. So that, thank you. What questions do y'all have? Yeah.
So on the user one of the things that while the UI was, I liked being able to filter by page, especially starting
Yes.
page or ending page. Can you still do that? As well as you can filter by event. Can you filter down to a page level?
So yes, you can. What you're going to have to do is with the report that you're seeing, I'm going to make y'all dizzy for a second. Y'all can see how much I love transitions. This is worth it, I promise. Okay, so here you have your event name. You can actually drop those down. Those drop downs at the top, they're called nodes. That's a little bit of a new definition for me to learn. But you can drop those down and say, instead of event name, I want to see page path, or I'm sorry, I want to see page title. Now, Google has not introduced page paths into your event names, which for all you SEOs, like maybe you're crying a little bit on the inside like I am because you change page titles all the time for rankings. But yes, you do have the option to drop down based on page title node. What's next? Danny?
Yeah, the forecasting foundation, right? You showed
Yes.
in order to get that to work, you actually have to set up a purchase event.
Yes.
So which event we use to actually
I want to make sure that I check with my documentation, but I know it is a purchase event, and I'm pretty sure that it just is purchase. But Google may have changed that recently.
so that would be a bit of a hack.
Yes, definitely a hack. I myself am one for hacky things, so I like it, but you know, personal bias. Yeah.
So on the where it says user on your like little timeline, user engagement event.
Yes.
Is there a way in GA4 where you can tell what engagement event that was, or is that only in Big Blue?
I'd have to noodle on your question a little bit.
It seems really like a vague statement from Google to tell us there was an engagement event, but we don't know what that was.
Yeah, so the engagement event, so what you're seeing with the user engagement event, that's actually not going to go directly into GA4. It's not going to be like an event that you look at. You're not going to look at a user engagement event. It's just that Google is sending that through and sending the timestamp information. Yeah. In the back?
So for when GA3 data finally duplicates, do you have is there any way, a good way to marry that data with GA4?
BigQuery.
Okay.
I mean, I'm sure you could hack in Looker Studio and just, I mean, you could do my data analyst is going to hate that I said this. You could do a hack where you've got one data studio report and another data studio report, and you put them on top of each other and make them the same color, and so they kind of look the same. But because your data model has changed, the money phrase of the day, you're going to see difference in sessions. You're not going to be comparing apples to apples. So long as your stakeholders are on board, you're okay. But I would put that big fat disclaimer there. Yeah.
Is the event form someone opens up another tab available to sort of view as well? So it's not like if you're A/B testing, see how often someone opens the tab or something.
No, so that wouldn't be available in this event, but you could send a custom event, or you might even be able to do something. I didn't talk about it today, but it's called, of course, I'm blanking on it now. You could create technically an audience-based event. So you could say, just thinking of the best way to explain this. And I think a visual would help. If I can think of the right visual. Okay, so essentially what you can do is you could add a sequence or set events and then build an audience based off of that. And whenever that audience fires, you can actually send another event. So you could say, hey, if somebody follows these 3 tasks, build an audience, send an event. And so then you could get a custom event there. You're definitely dealing with a custom solution, but that is very smart. And I mean,
If a regional base was like the same promotion worded differently, like dollars off and percent off, we're just trying to get an idea of like how big something with the tab during a certain promotion to see if like that's not as engaging compared to one versus that or something.
yeah, definitely. Any, yeah.
Yeah, the build on audience function, have that, I'm assuming that can be word over to Google Ads directly.
Yes.
So it's just using the same audience import.
I'm not as familiar with the GA or the Google Ads interface, but from what I've looked at initially, like this, it takes no custom knowledge or custom code. You just port it right in.
You have 2 accounts connected.
Yes. Yeah. Now you will have to connect your GA4 account to Google Ads if you had previously connected GA3 to Google Ads, but you know, you probably already knew that. Yeah.
How integrated can this be with Data Studio for things like path exploration? So we can't export that as CSV, but we could potentially get that data we're in Data Studio. Is that?
So, yeah, so the analytics community is a little bit split right now because the Data Studio integration for GA4 right now I hear is SHIT. So Charles Farina has a more technical explanation rather than my 4-letter word. But I think with Data Studio right now, I would base everything off of your Explore reports for the interim and then wait probably 6 months from now, and then people will stop complaining about Data Studio. But, yeah.
So right now, some of my larger scale clients, they'll have like 500 plus locations, and each one will have different conversion actions we can take. And so we are beyond the threshold for goal completion, right?
So what I would do,
So we were doing custom events, basically.
Yeah.
We're doing events, and then we have dynamic parameters that interject some kind of consistency to analytics. Do I have to create a custom event here, or will those custom things still work just fine in GA4?
I would do the custom event, but your custom injections, I would do that as a parameter.
Yeah. So like basically like if like you're on form, let's say you have a base contact form and drop down, pick your location, that location name will feed as like the label.
Yes.
So that will still work
Yeah, so you'll want to, so conversions are event-based in GA4. So you've just got to have the aggregated event name. But then with each event, you can add in different parameters and you can have the location, any other form characteristics you want. It's not going to look like category, action, and label. It's going to look like parameter, 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 parameter.
Okay, so can I just build a rule or does it build one for every location?
No, you just, if you create one event, then you just say there's a built-in functionality that just says turn this event into a conversion. So it's just a flip of a switch. And then your parameters are all.
So it could be even easier than the current setup.
Yeah. So, and that's another important thing that I did not mention in this, but if any of y'all have location or URL-based goals in Google Analytics 3, those aren't going to work in GA4. GA4 events are only GA4 conversions are only event-based. So figure out how to trigger custom events now. Any other questions? Okay. Well, thank y'all so much for your time. I really appreciate it.